Now, existence, you see, is something that is spontaneous. The Chinese word for nature, zhiran, means that which happens of itself. Your hair grows by itself. Your heart beats by itself. You breathe pretty much by itself. You don't have voluntary control over these things. So we say it happens spontaneously. So when you go to sleep and you try to go to sleep, you interfere with the spontaneous process of going to sleep. Try to breathe, real hard, and you find you get balled up in your breathing. You've got to let go and let it happen, because if you don't, you're going to be all clutched up. You're going to be constantly trying to do what can happen healthily only if you don't try. But we have a strange anxiety in us that if we don't interfere, it won't happen. And that's the root of an enormous amount of trouble. But the basis of it all is this, then. If we say, you must survive, or I must survive, life is earnest, and I've got to go on, then your life is a drag and not a game. Now, it's my contention, my personal opinion, this is my basic metaphysical axiom, shall we put it that way, that existence, the physical universe, is basically playful. There is no necessity for it whatsoever. It isn't going anywhere. That is to say, it doesn't have some destination that it ought to arrive at. In music, one doesn't make the end of a composition. If that were so, the best conductors would be those who played fastest. People go to a concert just to hear one crashing chord, because that's the end. Same way in dancing. You don't aim at a particular spot in the room. That's where you should arrive. The whole point of the dancing is the dance.
Oh, yeah. Pearls of wisdom. I'm back. That was like a little hiatus. Just a short hiatus. I'm not sure how long it was, actually. Was it a month? I don't think it was a month. It could have been a month. Yeah, it's probably a month. I might be doing this monthly at this point. I've gotten a little bit busy. But that kickoff there was, of course, Mr. Alan Watts. I made sure I was going to play a little bit of Alan Watts since I hadn't been up and running here for a brief period. And the subject today is walking. So you say, well, why Letting Go by Alan Watts? I think walking is the best form of letting go. For me, it is anyway. It gives me a chance to let go of things and wrap my mind around letting go, not trying to be in control of everything and everybody around me. Because I'm finding out that is a very important thing, to give people their freedom. When you give people their freedom, it really does, it makes everything work better. It really does. And there's a lot of freedom in walking. And there's a lot of letting go in walking. And there's, walking alone or walking with someone. They both have great aspects to them. And it seems like I'm going to be talking about walking for a half hour. But I'll tell you what, this is going to be maybe my favorite subject since I started this thing. Because I've absolutely loved the art of walking my entire life. And I never look at the ability to walk and what it does for me. I never look at it lightly. I've carried it through, and it's really done me a great service. It's exercise for me, too. And I did see something the other day, I think, on the good old intranet, and it was probably Instagram, because that's where I spend most of my time on. Someone saying, a couple people talking, workout people, and they were like, when did walking become exercise? I was laughing because I was pointing to myself, but they were like, you really need to up your game up if you're trying to count walking as exercise. To me, I do look at it as exercise, but not really. I don't really care. I don't really care what anyone says or if I look at anything a certain way. I do enough exercise. I was in the gym for 6 hours the other day. You would think I would be like ready to compete in an international bodybuilding contest with how much time I'm in the gym, but no, I do not. If you looked at me, you wouldn't think that. I should be in a lot better shape for being in the gym for 6 hours. But a big part of that is walking, which is a very light form of exercise. And I will tell that to those people talking. Hey, look, it's a light form of exercise. It exercises your mind. But I'm also doing this personal journey, which is walking the circumference of the earth. Which at this end of this month, I will put up again my stats on this month's walking. It's going to take me like years to accomplish this, so I'm not grinding it out purposely to try to get this thing done quick. It's just something I'm keeping track of. So maybe in 5, 6, 7 years, I could go, look, I walked the circumference of the earth. It's sort of a fun thing to do, and I walk enough that it's an interesting thing to keep track of. But I've been, I didn't think about it too much when I was younger, but I lived in a small town. But even when I was a small kid, I used to kind of walk around town, walk around our neighborhood, I think more than other kids did. I used to get up early in the morning, wake up, I think, before a lot of my friends, and I would walk around to different neighbors' houses. A lot of times they'd give me a little breakfast. That might have been the reason I did it. But I was a pretty athletic kid, so I wasn't overweight or anything from eating all these breakfasts. I burned off between bike riding and walking and running and playing sports. I played a lot of sports. I burned everything off. But I did walk around my neighborhood a lot. And then when I was a teenager, I used to do this mental exercise. Within my walking, we had this, when I moved out to the country, Hunterdon County country, the house my father built had a driveway that came in. It had sort of a circle. We were at the end of a dead-end road, and we had this circle in the front of the house that came out and then came up the end of the dead-end road. So it made a pretty nice loop. It probably I would guess it was an eighth of a mile loop. And I used to just walk around it when I was a teenager and write poetry in my mind and also think about what my life was going to be, what it was not going to be, the things I didn't want it to be, and the things that it was going to be, which is where I developed my really horrible relationship with money, because during those walks I blamed the idea of making money on a lot of things that I perceived as being negative. And so I put a lot of ideas into my mind, and I was a teenager, so I probably put a lot of bad ideas into my own mind, but I also think it's something that carried with me and did me some good also. Walking in a circle like that, I've done that a lot at different stages and different places in my life, just being able to walk in a circle. I really can release my mind either on a straight long walk or on a circle walk. And if I get into my imagination, especially, I could let go of my mind, and I could think about a lot of things that are right in front of me. I could be creative. I could write poetry or songs or other kind of things. while I'm walking. But I could also have a fantastic imagination, which I don't know if that serves me well, but of creating all these stories and scenarios and stuff that are not real and are never going to be real. But somehow, an hour could go by, and I won't even notice that I'm kind of not even notice I'm walking for that long because of my imagination. So that's always been something that I've carried with me. But I've also loved walking trails. And when I was young, I used to hike a lot by myself. I hiked all these trails in Hunterdon County, the reservoir trails and various trails around. Where I used to go all the time was the Delaware Water Gap, right where New Jersey and Pennsylvania meet at where the Appalachian Trail is. And I used to do like I remember being 3.2 miles from the base to Sunfish Pond, which was at the top of the mountain where the Appalachian Trail sort of flattens out and goes along the mountain for a long ways. And I used to do that hike quite a bit by myself, but then I would go with friends also. Very different experiences. But I did a lot of walking in my whole life. And now I still do because I'm in this small little town that's on the border of Pennsylvania. So I can walk around town, which is kind of nice. I could walk a lot of side streets and back streets. I found some back streets up into the mountain the other day. That was nice, but there's also a trail here that goes along the river on the Jersey side. And it goes from here to Frenchtown, and then it goes beyond to like Lambertville, if you know these towns and know what I'm talking about. It's a little rough from Milford to Frenchtown, but it's still got some really nice places just walking along the river. And, walking along a river on a trail, whether it's a little bit wooded or opens up a little bit, it's getting into the flow of the river while you're walking is like a whole nother level of meditation. And so I'm able to do that a lot here. But then if I walk over the bridge, which I just love, it's not a huge bridge, but it's one of these New Jersey, Pennsylvania bridges that's just like, it's 2 lanes, but you got to watch your mirrors that you don't hit the other guy going across. And it's long. It's not a short bridge. It's not like you just go over, you're just over it. You're on it for, 30 seconds, maybe a little longer than that. So it's got a little length to it. And when you walk over it, there's a nice walking path on the outside of the driving bridge. And you walk over it and you get to see the river. And sometimes lately I'll be up I'll be up way before the sun rises, but then once the sun starts to rise, I'll scurry out of my door and I will head over the bridge. And that moment of looking out over the river, and the way the sun's coming up, it's surreal. It's just a surreal thing. It puts you in a place. And then once I get over the bridge, I go just down a little back street, and I'm on the canal path where I get to walk the canal, which is absolutely dry right now. And the other day I saw these 2 humongous turtles mating, these huge snapping turtles. I mean, it's this. I'm not talking about something that's like, this is like 2 feet, even more. The shell. I mean, I've never seen turtles this big. Very, very cool. I should post a picture of that. But this nice little thin trail, it goes for miles on the Pennsylvania side. And I'm really enjoying walking that. There's this one little small section that if I go to the end and come back, if I do that section, it's like 3 miles for me, which is kind of perfect just to get it in early in the morning before I hit the gym. But, I get all my thoughts out with each step. I think I get thoughts out and thoughts in, thoughts out, thoughts in, thoughts out. I recommend highly doing walks and do it with friends and other people too. Because when you walk with somebody, you also get into a flow of talking. One thing I saw was, when you come into the room, I learned this recently. You come into a room and someone else comes into the room, and you both haven't been together. Your breath isn't in tune with each other, and so your energy is not in tune with each other. And over a few minutes, your breath, if you get your breath in tune, then your energy starts to become in tune with each other. And it takes you to another place of comfort if you're capable of doing that. I think walking with someone, I think it would even be much, it would really, that would really be a factor. If you got in stride with each other and you were breathing together and you got in the energy flow, then when you started talking, you really probably would really be able to share things in a certain way doing that, But, let's even look at other aspects of walking. Look at a pilgrimage, a Holy Land pilgrimage, where these guys go and they walk for days and days just to make a pilgrimage for religious purposes. That's always been sort of exciting for me to think about doing. I've wanted to do a religious pilgrimage, but I'm not religious at all, so it's kind of strange in a way. But I could almost imagine myself going somewhere to do that, to be amongst people. I'd like to see what it's like where everybody's minds are at when they do something like that. Even though I probably wouldn't be participating in that part of it. Maybe just an inward religious experience for myself. I mean, one time, it's like 8 years ago now, I went on a little trip by myself up to Maine, and part of the trip, on the way back, I stopped in Concord, Massachusetts, at Walden Pond, which I imagine some of you are familiar and some of you might not be. Henry David Thoreau had a famous book called Walden. And he actually had a really famous lecture called Walking. It was a fairly long lecture, maybe an hour and a half, where he called it Walking. Of course, it covered a lot of subjects of nature. With him, it was really nature. But Walden was he was friends with Ralph Waldo Emerson, another great writer, and Emerson owned a cabin out in Walden Pond, which at that time was completely out in nature, not around too much around anything. I mean, nothing around it really, but still pretty. There's a beach there now where actually a lot of families go and party and do recreational stuff all summer long, and the cabin and the site are kind of secondary. Although there's a really nice, if you ever get out there at the Concord, Massachusetts, and you go out to Walden, there is actually a really nice, I don't know if it's state or national facility there, which is like a museum, and it shows like a film and explains it. And then there's right where that is, they have a replica of what the cabin looked like. And then you can walk out to the site and sort of, the cabin's not there anymore, but you could see the footings and stuff like that. It's kind of a good experience because the whole book's about Henry David Thoreau's relationship with nature and what happens when he goes out there to be by himself in solitude for a while. And I stopped there, and that was almost probably as close to a religious kind of experience as I'll get. And I would recommend going off season, anywhere outside of on the backside of Memorial Day and on the other side of Labor Day, because that's what I did. I think it was November or even early December, and it was pretty desolate actually. So what was nice was I went over to the museum, and then I walked across the street, and I walked where the pond is, and there's a beach, and I walked the trail. And there was a few people, but not too many. And then once I got over to the site of the cabin, there really wasn't too many people, because then you kind of wander into the woods. And I could see the walk. I could see the walk that he did, and the other walks that he was capable of doing in the area, and the frame of mind that might put you in. And that's probably as close to a religious experience as I would get. I'll throw a couple quotes, Henry David Thoreau quotes at you, just short ones to give you an idea of this kind of thing. Let's see. I took a walk in the woods and came out taller than the trees. Right? That puts you in a frame of mind. I am alarmed when it happens that I have walked a mile into the woods bodily without getting there in spirit. And then, in short, all good things are wild and free. I just pulled up a couple quick ones there. Yeah. It gets your mind thinking, right? You have to go out there in spirit as well as in body, and do your thing. But oh boy, yes, very exciting life. Very exciting life. Walking should be a part of it. What do I want? Do I want to talk about anything beyond my walking experiences? Whenever a subject like this, too, I always say you could count how many times I say the title of the subject, and then you could laugh at me because it's a lot, right? I have to listen back to these things. I hope everyone realizes that, it's quite a experiment and an experience in itself to listen to yourself talk this way. And it turns out that I've figured out, especially lately, that I'm a very good talker. Not necessarily that I'm good at it, I just can do a lot of it, which wasn't always the case for me. And it doesn't happen with everybody. It specifically only happens with certain people, that I tend to really bring my thoughts into play. And when I do, I'm able to be very honest and open. I like that. I like to be honest and open. I like to give people their freedom. I like to have it myself. I've got no idea right now what the future holds for me, which is pretty wild. But I'm cruising along here. I'm feeling a little bit like I felt when I was like 20 years old, And we all know there was good and bad to that. Anyway, I guess I don't have that much more to say. If I start digging in at this point, I'm going to really start digging in deeply. And I haven't really put that much of a thought process out. The thing I do is I used to walk. I used to like to walk without headphones on or music or anything, and just listen to the sounds of everything. And I still do that quite a bit. But I also found, maybe because I've decided to do so much walking lately, that I do like to listen. And I listen to a lot of Alan Watts while I'm walking. I'm also in school right now getting my license for massage. So part of my walking is also listening to my audio recordings of whatever I'm studying for that specific week, because it turns out there's quite a bit of studying that must be done on anatomy and physiology when you're getting your massage license. But so I listen to that, and I also lately have been listening to sort of affirmations. I have a few specific ones I like to listen to. There's a lot of them out there, just like affirming yourself. And the other day when I was walking it was on that 6-hour gym day. I started coming up with a new book idea of my own for sort of a philosophy, inspirational, poetic book. And I started writing it while I was walking. I think I might write the whole thing while I'm walking, because I wrote a lot while I was. I wrote. It's not going to be some big, complex book. It's going to be a lot of these poetic, sort of inspirational, and not all of it's going to be inspirational. Some of it will be a little dark too, I think. Poetic verses that all come together and make sense together, but are all somewhat different also. It's not going to be a big, long thing, but it's going to be easy to read, and I think I'm going to do sketches with it. But I think all the word section of it I'll try to write while I'm walking, because it seemed to work the day I did it. So I'll listen to a few of those things, and I'll listen to some different things. There's a spiritual guy named Wayne Dyer. He's not around anymore, but he did a reading of the Tao Te Ching, which I listened to that while I walk also. So if you could, and I could actually think and use my mind. I could use my imagination. I could let go. I could go into thought processes while I'm listening to something. So I've developed that skill where I could actually intake information through my ears, listening to something, while at the same time my mind is in a thought process. Some people might call that overthinking. It possibly might be. But I was talking to someone about overthinking and the possibility that, yes, I do some overthinking, and I may overthink things quite a bit. But I enjoy a lot of it. I enjoy a lot of this rolling through the thought process. It's not something that stresses me out or bothers me. It's something I enjoy. And so ultimately, I think it leads me to a lot of good places. It leads me to the place where I can understand people. I think a lot about what people say to me and what they're looking for. And by thinking those things, I think that I get to a good place for myself and hopefully for them too. But anyway, enough with the walking for this time around. I hope everyone's enjoying themselves. It doesn't really matter whether you missed me or not. Hopefully you'll give this a listen and you'll go out walking, and it'll give you something to do for a half hour. I think to blow this one out the other end, I'm going to play again some Alan Watts, and I might just give you a really long rolling one here where he's going to go through a bunch of different ideas. With Alan Watts, he can go through 15 ideas and it all flows together beautifully. I'm very glad I found this guy's words. Go to alanwatts.org, download his app, give him a listen, and enjoy it for whatever it brings you. Same for Pearls of Wisdom. If it brings you something great, if it doesn't, you don't have to listen. I don't care. All right, folks, walking. I think I might. It's still light out. This is maybe the first time I've cut one of these where it's still light out. I might go for a walk.
There is no problem of life in the sense in which we ordinarily use that phrase. And that seems an almost astounding affront to our common sense. Life not a problem. We see it as nothing but problems. We regard ourselves in a morning, noon, and night struggle to solve the great problem of existence. And for some people this problem is why does the universe exist? For other people, the problem is, how am I going to get enough to eat? And therefore, when you take it at one extreme or the other, who can say that life is not a problem? And yet here is this audacious suggestion that what we are bothering about is a ghost. It's something that isn't really there. One of the characteristics of neurotic behavior, is it's repetitive. The neurotic personality keeps going through unsuccessful life patterns again and again and again, and nothing seems to be able to stop it. The round, or the rat race of birth and death, that is to say, of life as we ordinarily live it. Because it is a round, it is a vicious circle, for the reason that we keep trying to solve problems that are not simply overwhelmingly difficult, but problems that are not problems at all. They only look like problems. And so when we tackle, impossible questions, things go round and round and never come out. Now, take, for example, some of the many ghosts which haunt our minds. We say, for example, that we all have an instinct to survive. And a lot of people thus treat the problem of life as, how am I to survive? And one might almost be a little cautious about relieving people of this problem, lest they should lose the impetus to go on doing their work. But that also, impetus to go on doing your work, is another ghost. We think we are driven, We think that what we do has these mysterious things behind it. See, it's very important simply to keep your eye on what is being done and to describe that. And if you describe it clearly enough and well enough, you will probably find that the ghost of instinct disappeared. Thus, when we talk about an instinct for survival, what is this saying? What is the evidence for the fact that there is an instinct for survival? There is no evidence except that, in fact, people survive until they don't. And this is rather odd, because what happens to the instinct for survival when people don't survive? So, in this way, we find that when we try to explain some kind of behavior, some kind of activity, by supposing that there is a motivating force, a sort of incarnate spook behind the whole thing, what has really happened is that we haven't described what's going on sufficiently clearly. Now, this comes out in another way. When we try to describe anything at all and think that we are describing something that, as it were, exists all by itself. As I've often said, we are so bugged by the notion of stuff, stuff acting, stuff doing things. But all that is, is that the world strikes us as being material until we examine it closely. In other words, a distant nebula in the heavens looks like a solid star until you turn a giant telescope on it and you make out the clear pattern of a spiral nebula. In other words, the concept of stuff is a sensation that we get when we haven't examined things sufficiently closely, or when our instruments are not fine enough to penetrate what we're observing. But when the instruments are fine enough, what we get instead is pattern, and pattern is simply a form of behavior, of activity. Consider this in another way. Let's go back to the human organism and ask the question, well, what about its shape? How is it that a human organism is contained? All the organs are kept in by the skin. Well, we will describe, of course, the structure of skin and how it is that it holds together. But then we'll soon find out that we're also talking about the surrounding air, which impinges upon the human skin with a pressure of about 15 pounds per square inch, so that if it weren't there, we'd explode. Now, so the question arises, what is keeping the organism in shape? And we find out that it is not only what is going on inside the skin that keeps it in shape, but also what's going on outside the skin. And when we go on to describe this still more carefully, we discover that it isn't quite correct to say that it is the air that is doing this, or that it is the organism that is doing this. We begin to describe instead what Dewey and Bentley, in their very fascinating book, Knowing and the Known, call a transaction. Now, that is to say, a buyer can't buy unless somebody is also selling. You can't know anything unless there's something to know. And this fact, you see, is constantly overlooked, that anything in the world, whether it's inanimate or animate, whatever it may be, is there by virtue of being in a transactional relationship, not with something else, but with everything else. A human being, of course, has ever so many relationships. They're very complicated. A person, say, we call a doctor, is not only related to his actual work of doctoring, but he may be also a father related to a family. He's a citizen related to a community in other ways than as the doctor, and so on and so forth. And so we begin to imagine him, as it were, apart from his relationships, as a sort of constant, going through all these different relationships, and therefore in some way different from them all. But this, you see, creates a ghost. It creates a being independent of all the different relationships in which he finds himself, whereas, strictly speaking, he is inseparable from those relationships, and we can't eliminate them. We can only describe him fully as the entire whole complex. So that, in other words, every organism could be called the behavior of the field or environment in which it is found. Now, this doesn't mean that the organism is something pushed around by the environment and is completely passive and inert, and that everything that it does is simply a response to external stimuli. Because, in a way, the organism is part of its environment. After all, it is an object, a process in nature, in the cosmos, just as much as everything in its environment. There is really no way of separating the two. Instead of speaking, as it were, in this terminology of doers and done-tos, attackers and victims, we simplify things considerably. Just by confining ourselves to a description of what is happening. And as we do this, we get a peculiarly clarified picture of the world, without all sorts of ghosts. And it is in this way that we also begin to be able to have some preliminary intuition or sensation of the meaning of the fact that life is not a problem. In other words, not a contest between ourselves and our environment. This conception of life turns out to be basically phony.